I've got a question. Do you see any of Luke relating to AD 70?
Yeah, I said that earlier. I may not have been real clear on it. I do think that there may be the statement in Luke's gospel which talks about when you see the armies coming. I mean, that has a lot of similarity, obviously, with what you see in the coming of the armies against Jerusalem. My concern is that if that is in fact the exact thing it's talking about, some of the sequencing between what actually happened, we know from Josephus' account, and what you see in Luke's gospel seems a little bit off. It doesn't seem to quite fit. I mean, it's an obvious. I mean, just on the surface, you look and say, "Oh yeah, that's a fulfillment." And I think it may be more typological even in fulfillment. That is, something like this occurs later on, which will occur again, because it's not an exact parallel. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. House, for your presentation. Regarding the flight of the Jews in Matthew 24, verses 15 and following, did you find anything in Josephus that in any way bears any resemblance? I know they have some things in Eusebius, but I was curious if anything in Josephus bears any resemblance to that flight.
Well, Eusebius mentions, and also Josephus mentions it, that there were some people that obviously left. What you find interesting is that before the Roman armies actually got to Jerusalem, lots of people left. And if it's not like our modern warfare where you have the planes attack real quick. You had quite a bit of build-up time for the people to leave Jerusalem if they want to get out of there. And we know from history that a lot of people went over into Jordan, into Pella, and so forth, and I think that's reasonable, and Eusebius mentions that. My concern in the issue, Mark and Matthew don't actually talk about the surrounding of the armies and the city and so forth. Luke does, and if Luke is a fulfillment of it, my issue is, though, that the Luke passage says that when you're surrounded, then leave Judea. He didn't say, by the way, when you're surrounded, leave Jerusalem. Because if you're surrounded, how do you get out of Jerusalem? You see my point? I don't see how that works. I can hear him say, if Luke had actually said, when you see the Roman armies approaching, from approaching Jerusalem, leave it, that would make sense to me. But since it says you're already surrounded, and I know you read Josephus' description of how they surrounded it. You know how they did Masada? You don't get out. You don't sneak through. I mean, every few paces you got a Roman soldier looking for you, standing on a wall, and you got this tall wall and you got trenches. I mean, it's not easy to get out. So it doesn't say if you see them approaching, when you're surrounded, leave Jerusalem. It says leave Judea. Over against, if they're approaching Jerusalem, you could leave Jerusalem. So I don't think the passages match. And Josephus does recognize that people did escape from Jerusalem before the Roman army got there. He talks about many people who tried to escape after the Roman army had got there, and they were killed. He talks about a lot of people being killed trying to get out. So anyway, that's how I view it.
Thank you for your presentation, Wayne. Over here.
Oh, hi there, Joe.
Your chart books have been so helpful and informative. Do you have any charts on Matthew 24, Luke 21, and preterism's view on that?
I came close to doing a chart on this stuff. I thought about it. I like to do charts. They're fun. I could do a charts on Josephus' War of the Jews. How would that do? Would that sell? No, I thought about that, but you can look at the parallels, and that's why I'm saying I'm trying to describe them to you. I don't see there's an exact comparison when you really look at the comparisons. Yeah.
Dispensationalists like to do charts.
Yeah, well, that's why if anybody needs more information on that, see me.
I had a comment just on the Olivet Discourse and Mark, then versus Luke. What do you think about Matthew 24 and Luke 13 being exact parallels? Because it says Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives, and he asked 3 questions. What will the sign of these be? The sign of your coming and the end of the world. 3 questions versus Luke, while it only asks 2 questions. It says, as he looked up in the treasury, he saw the widow putting her mites in, and then they say, what will the sign of this time be, and when will these stones not be cast down? And then Luke answers both. So what do you think about Matthew and Mark not even ever touching a preterist, meaning surrounding Jerusalem, that being total fulfilled, let's say in the year 2000 and whatever, versus Luke being taking a piece, because he says in 8 to 11, take heed that you not be deceived. He talks about the end, but then he says in 12, but before these things they will lay hands on you. That's Jerusalem. And then he says, woe unto you as you run. And then in 24 he talks about the diaspora, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled.
Okay, you said a lot there, and I'm hoping I catch all of that. If I'm understanding what you're saying, you recognize that Matthew 24 and Mark 13 are speaking of the same issue. Okay. Luke's gospel, I agree, does have that little introductory section, and then you move into the question of the answering, which also is talked about in the beginning of Matthew and Mark, also the answering in reference to these things. Just off the top of my head, and I'm about to be corrected here in a moment, I don't know, but let me just sort of give you my perspective. It seems to me that, like in many of the gospel accounts, you set pericopes in the middle of a discussion. And you realize all these things are not necessarily pericope to pericope. They're not all necessarily chronological. They're oftentimes set within a context of discussion. And I have difficulty understanding how you would have him answering the question about the temple and the destruction of the city and all those things one time, and then going right back up to Matthew, in the Matthew and Markan text, and answering exactly the same thing again. I know you're arguing two locations there, and what I'm suggesting is possibly, and I'm not looking at it in front of me here right now, but I would suggest that probably what occurs is that what we see in the beginning of Matthew and Mark, in which he answers the question, and what we have in Luke in a different setting, may actually be occurring on the Mount of Olives, so that Mark or Luke puts it in that context of the discussion he's trying to get over, the actual statement that is fulfilled in Matthew and Mark. In other words, Jesus, the setting of it, I think, is probably more within the context having left the temple and being there on the Mount of Olives. And Luke, when he uses it, puts it right after that other story. So I think it's only said probably one time. That's just off the top of my head. Yes, sir.